Okay, so we're here now. We're down to session 3. Remember a couple of weeks ago we did the early church fathers, and I didn't bring up the fact that these early church fathers, we left out most of them. I mean, we just covered a few of them. And the early church fathers, this period is several hundred years. And there were, if you wanted to divide up though, the early church fathers, they were 2 different classes of people. And that is that during this period of time, early church fathers and persecution and heresies, we're starting about the year 64, 65 or somewhere like that. And then we're going all the way up to about the year 400 or so. So it covers an extended period of time. The Christian church, we talked about the fact that the Greeks and the Jews persecuted the Christians, and then it went over to the Romans and they persecuted the Christians, but there's not really defined periods of time in which these people were persecuting them and then these people were persecuting them. That this period from 64 up to about 400 or so, there were persecutions going on, and then there were heresies coming on. Now, they weren't simultaneous. The persecutions were the early part of that period, and then the heresies came up later. Because in the early part of the period, when they were enduring the persecutions, they really didn't have time to argue about doctrine. You know, they didn't worry about the finer points of it. They were trying to keep from getting fed to the lions. So the early church fathers at that time that were essentially going through the persecutions, they were known as the apologetic church fathers. They weren't writing these books and doing these arguments and stuff on specific doctrine. They were going through the very, very basics of Christianity and presenting that to the Romans. And these were the church fathers that were writing these letters and saying, we're not that bad, stop killing us. And in the early part, we tend to think that Nero was the big one that did everything, but he's not. Nero wasn't the primary persecutor. Nero was just nuts.
Yeah.
And so what happened was, and we've got a video on Nero, and we'll talk about him for a little bit, in that before Nero there was persecutions, but it was sporadic. It wasn't all over the empire. There were just little pockets of it. And then even when Nero started these persecutions, remember he killed Peter and he killed Paul, and he blamed the Christians for the fire in Rome. And that was a short period of time in a very limited area. The rest of the time, it was still on to get off again. It didn't really come in as an organized empire-wide persecution until about the year 250. So first we're going to talk about this, the problems that we had with Nero first.
Was it Nero who put the Christians in the Colosseum to be horribly killed?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, it's going to tell you in pretty graphic detail what Nero did. I'm going to start this and then we're going to see if we need to turn the lights off because it's pretty dark outside now.
Yeah, but there's a lot of reflection in the ceiling.
While the rumor was never proven, virtually every significant historian blames the fire on Nero himself, no doubt because of what Nero decided to do afterward. He immediately commandeered huge portions of Rome's scorched earth to erect one of the biggest, most opulent palaces in all the known world. It's known as the Domus Aurea, or the Golden House. Nero was also shrewd enough to accuse a scapegoat for the fire to appease the general Roman public. The culprits of choice, the Christians, and blaming them sparked the first great outbreak of state-sponsored persecution that lasted for several years. The Christians were already somewhat of a nuisance, accused of cannibalism because they consumed the Lord's Supper, which commemorated the sacrificial body and blood of Jesus, and atheism because they refused to bow to the Roman gods, including the Caesar. So for Nero, they were the perfect target. An ancient non-Christian Roman historian alive at the time named Tacitus mentions the persecution in his annals. This is what he wrote.
Nero falsely accused and executed with the most exquisite punishments those people called Christians, who were infamous for their abominations. The originator of the name Christ was executed as a criminal by the procurator Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius, and though repressed, this destructive superstition erupted again, not only through Judea, which was the origin of this evil, but also through the city of Rome. First, those were seized who admitted their faith, and then, using the information they provided, a vast multitude were convicted, not so much for the crime of burning the city, but for hatred of the human race. Perishing, they were additionally made into spoils. They were killed by dogs by having the hides of beasts attached to them, or they were nailed to crosses or set aflame, and when the daylight passed away, they were used as nighttime lamps. Even though they were clearly guilty, people began to pity these sufferers because they were consumed not for the public good, but on account of the fierceness of one man.
One such martyr who was killed by crucifixion was a prominent apostle named Peter, who had become the head of the church in Rome. Considering himself to be unworthy to experience the same death as Jesus, Peter requested to be crucified upside down. Another apostle, one of Christianity's most influential because he wrote almost half of the New Testament, Paul, was also martyred during Nero's persecution. But since Paul was a Roman citizen, he was exempt from the torture of crucifixion and was beheaded instead. Nero's persecution, while bloody and unspeakably cruel, quite simply backfired. Not only was there growing sympathy for the suffering Christians, their worldview and beliefs were brought into the limelight. Countless Romans witnessed these believers endure ghastly torture rather than recant their faith in Christ as Lord and his resurrection from the dead. Christian tradition holds that, except for John, all of Jesus' apostles were executed for their faith. For many Christians, this is a strong argument for the truth of their claims. The apostles, because they were eyewitnesses, knew for certain whether Jesus' resurrection was true or false. This set them apart. History is full of people willing to die for what they believe, but it's difficult to find any sane person who will give their life for a cause they know to be fraudulent. Those who defend the Christian faith ask this question: how likely was it that a man would choose torture and death if all he had to do was simply deny a myth? So the growth of this great world religion was fueled by the blood of its saints, all because of a fire at a racetrack. And Nero, after hearing of an assassination plot, committed suicide by stabbing himself in the throat. His legacy then drifted into history, and even today he's considered to be one of Rome's worst Caesars.
Robert, we had talked about this before, one of these, what kind of persecution it was, and there's one of the handouts says, why did the Romans persecute Christians? And it goes over religious, social, and political, and it goes into it a lot more depth than I was
Interested in reading that.
able to do so. So we know that Nero was crazy, and then after Nero committed suicide, things kind of died down, and there were periods at which there wasn't that much persecution. Now there were pockets of persecution, but then again it never reached the state that it did later. And one of the things that stirred things up, and this is in one of these other handouts, which is Decius, and he issued this ruling in 250 that required an annual offering of sacrifice at the Roman altars to the gods and the genius of the emperor. And if you did that, you got this little piece of paper that was called a tabellus, and everybody had to carry their tabellus with them, and they would especially stop the Christians and demand to see their tabellus. And if the Christian couldn't produce the Tibellus, then off they went. And some of them were killed, and some of them were imprisoned or tortured and things like that. One of the then problems that developed at the end of all this was when all this was over with, then you had people that had done the offerings and had gotten their Tibellus, and then you had people that didn't do it, that were viciously tortured and carried the scars for that torture. What about these two people sitting in the pew next to each other? The people that had gone through the persecution did not want the other people to come back into the church. They said, we can't allow them to come back into the church. That was one of the big controversies that happened.
You mean, am I understanding that they consider it a rite of passage? That torture was a rite of passage?
Yes.
For entry into the church?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness.
And they were proud of the fact
Oh, I'm glad we don't do that.
that they had been tortured. And one of the reasons that the monastic, and I don't think we talk about the monastic period, but the monastic period, you know, people going out into the mountains and living the rest of their life. And a lot of them, one guy spent years buried up to his neck in dirt.
Oh.
And bizarre things like that. And the reason that the monastics required so much asceticism was because the persecutions were over, and they did not have that avenue to show their religiosity or their passion for Christianity. So they had to do something else, and so they became monk or went out into the desert and didn't have anything to do with anybody anymore.
So that accounts for these fundamentalists, orthodoxy, to lash themselves with a whip, actually opening up their back. Okay.
And that still happens
Yeah.
in South America. No,
Yeah.
they still do that. So then the next thing that happened, this thing that after Decius came Diocletian, and I'm just going to read this. Diocletian was a strong military leader who came to the empire. He decided that only a strong monarchy could save the empire and its classical culture. In 285, he ended the diarchy of the Principate created by Caesar Augustus, by which the emperor and the Senate had shared authority. So he said the Senate doesn't matter anymore. He just got rid of the Senate. And then it says, out of this historical situation came the most severe persecution that the Christians ever endured. The first edicts called for persecution of the Christians that came in 303. Diocletian ordered the cessation of meetings of the Christians, the destruction of the churches, the deposition of officers of the church, the imprisonment of those who persisted in their testimony to Christ, and the destruction of the scriptures by fire. So he's one. And another little tidbit is that he was a co-emperor with this one called Galerius, and Galerius was essentially the one that really wanted to do this. Diocletian was the big, head emperor, and he didn't really want to do that. They say maybe it was because there is some evidence that his wife was a Christian, and so he didn't want to do this, but this Galerius guy talked him into doing this severe, massive persecution, and that lasted for a long time. And this next video we're going to watch is about Diocletian. This one is a pretty good video to give you just the statistics about everything. It is a little bit evangelical. It's from a pastor that has a church, and it's like, well, here's what we need to endure and stuff like that. So So I didn't exactly agree with all the things that he said.
You know, if you don't want to go into total darkness, we can illuminate the hallway, and that would not reflect on the.
You want to try that and see if... But this next one, they made one claim that I kind of disagreed with. They said that because Diocletian demanded that all the Bibles be destroyed, that the Christians took their Bibles and tore them up into different pieces, and everybody took a piece home with them. And then that's why we don't have any Bibles before this date.
Interesting.
But obviously, there were bits of scripture having been written by several different people or tribes, and that came together under the
Yeah,
subject.
well, how many times have you heard about, we don't have this whole book, only we have it's fragments of, you heard fragments of, they talk about fragments. He said that's why there were only fragments available before that time. But I disagree with that because the Bible was not finished this time. They hadn't even decided what was in the Bible, so I don't go along with that, with what he said at all.
But whatever book they had at that time, probably,
Mhm.
even though it wasn't finished.
And then the arguments were, what do we do with the people that handed in their Bibles? Or their scriptures, since there weren't Bibles. What do we do with the people that handed in? Do we let them back in the church?
Yeah.
And that was one of the big controversies, is whether or not to let them back in the church. Other than that, it's a pretty good video.
The closest the church ever got to extinction took place with the man who built this structure behind me. I'm standing in front of Diocletian's baths. Diocletian was the final of the persecuting emperors. He was the one who led the most complete extinction level event against the church. There were 3 waves of persecution. In our studies of the book of Romans, we learned about Nero. Nero was a sporadic, kind of like flailing against anyone he happened to hit the Christians. That was the first era of persecution. The second era, we've also studied, especially with the time at Patmos with John in Revelation. John was exiled by the second wave of persecution, Domitian, and followed by Trajan. And that's the persecution that swept up the saints in Smyrna, that swept up John, and he was exiled to Patmos. It's also when the provinces had entire province-wide persecutions. All of these events were basically the first and the second only touched a small part of the Roman Empire, but not Diocletian. Diocletian reigned from 284 to 305, and in those 21 years, he began the most systematic purge of Christianity. But to show you how good he was at everything he did, the building behind me, 1.3 million square feet, the largest of all the ancient Roman bath palaces. This had all of the delights the Romans loved in the Roman bath that 3,000 people at once could enjoy. And basically, this whole square of Republica follows the pattern of this gigantic bath. But that's not all that Diocletian did. He was a superior administrator. He fixed the Roman roads, all 54,000 miles of them. He fixed all of the administration of the Roman Empire, even down to what the people needed on a very personal level, so that they were very comfortable with the city of Rome and all the other provinces. He was very good as an emperor and very harsh. He won his battles, and he always accomplished his engineering desires, like this bath behind me. And when he turned his focus on the church, it became the last and greatest persecution. He came closest to ending Christianity that anybody has ever done, until we get to the book of Revelation. When Satan gets a chance to be confined to this world, we read in Revelation 12, this is what he does to believers. It says, well, starting in verse 10, and I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, now salvation and strength in the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ has come. The accuser of our brethren who accused them before our God day and night has been cast down to earth. Satan, when he's cast down to earth, begins the systematic pursuit of God's chosen people of promise, the Jews, and all of the saints. And there is great martyrdom so that they overcome him, verse 11, by the blood of the Lamb, by the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives unto death. What did Diocletian do? Diocletian, number one, began by eradicating all of the ministers of the gospel. He killed every known pastor he could find. Either they were in prison or they were killed. Secondly, he went through and destroyed wherever the churches met. That's why there is really no meeting place that we know of, archaeologically speaking, still standing anywhere of the early church that's before the 300 AD. There are none left because he systematically, throughout the whole empire, destroyed them, systematically killed all of the pastors, and finally, he realized this book that I'm teaching from and that you're a part of this course in, he knew this was vital. So he sent his legions out to destroy all the copies of the Bible. Guess what? You can go through any of the great museums of the world, even the great historic seminaries, and you'll find there is no complete manuscript of the Bible that predates Diocletian. He did it. He destroyed all of them. There are none that are earlier than his reign. Now, what did the believers do? The same thing they did under communism's purge. The believers in communism would cut their Bibles into pieces and spread it out in the congregation so that everyone had a piece. That's what the early believers did. They cut the manuscripts into pieces, and now we find 25,000 fragments of the scriptures that preserve for us the entire Bible, but never a complete manuscript copy. Well, Diocletian finally came to an impasse. It was during his reign that some of the great martyr stories come out, where his legionnaires were called to destroy an entire town, to kill every person, 10,000 people, throw them off the cliffs. And the legionnaires finally said, we won't do this. And many, many of his troops, his legionnaires, came to Christ and became believers. He had to start executing legionnaires. And that's why Diocletian became the first Roman emperor to retire. He wasn't killed in battle. He wasn't assassinated or poisoned. He didn't die of dissipation. He quit. He said, that's it. He could not defeat Christianity, so he just stopped. And at that moment, a young general, one of the other leaders of the empire, Constantine, came forth, defeated the others of the tetrarchs, and established Christianity to be legal. That's the history of this bath, of the extinction level event, and of the history of the growth of the early church into the Roman Catholic Church. But what's the lesson? Revelation 12:11. Because back then and today, we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of our testimony and by being faithful unto death. I just wonder today, are you ready for persecution to come? It's coming in our day. We're not in the tribulation, but many people will feel we are the tighter the noose gets on Christianity. How do we be faithful? Not in our own strength. The grace of God that brings salvation can also keep us faithful to the end. Diocletian's baths, the extinction level event, the closest Christianity got to extinction. The man who did it was the engineer who built this largest Roman building of all time, this wonder of engineering, and this man who couldn't defeat God. The church survived, and we're a part of it today.
say communism?
You said the communists followed that
Okay.
paradigm of tearing up books.
Well, that's what I picked out, but I'm going, isn't that a little early?
But sort of like Fahrenheit 451.
Yeah, I love that movie. That was a good one.
So I read somewhere that when the other emperors took over after Diocletian and the empire began to crumble, that they found Diocletian and begged him to come back and take over and save the empire. And the message he sent back was, if you could only see the cabbages that I'm growing in my garden, you would know what was really important.
Apparently the captain.
I was interested though in this moderator's sense that he asks, are you ready for persecution?
Mhm.
And I think one can argue that we need to prepare for that, maybe not in our lifetimes, but society is turning against not only the church, but religion in general. And if it keeps trending in the way that it currently is, Christianity will become the pariah of society. And that does lead to forms of persecution, either politically, emotionally, heaven forbid, physically. I don't think we would revert to Roman values, but there are different forms of persecution, and it just worries me that we might be headed in that direction.
Well, he is from a millennialist church,
Okay.
and so that colors what he's saying about Christ coming back in the 1,000-year reign, and that we're all going to get taken up, and then there's going to be 1,000 years of persecution.
You know, that just seems absurd to me. But I also believe that Christ does come, does become manifest every time a person opens their heart to the entrance of Jesus. Then he becomes manifest. So it's not like he's going to start lecturing in Albertson's parking lot, right? It's a very individual thing.
But is he going to come with the trumpet sound and come from the east
Not in my mind.
and appear in the sky in the east?
I just can't buy that.
So now let's move on to who saved Christianity from the persecution.
Oh, that was Constantine. Absolutely.
Remember, the first thing, nothing is absolute.
But he actually renamed Byzantium, what is now Istanbul. It became Constantinople.
Is that name still being used?
Before him was Galerius, and Galerius issued an edict from his deathbed in 311 that gave toleration to Christianity, provided the Christians did not violate the peace of the empire. Persecution did not cease completely until Licinius, who was one of the co-emperors with Constantine, and the two of them issued the Edict of Milan in 313. This edict brought freedom of worship, but it brought freedom of worship not only to Christianity, but to all religions. And Constantine named himself the head of the Christian church, but he did not give up the title of head of the pagan church. And he was not baptized until just before he died. So through his life, and it'll talk a little bit about the bizarre behavior of Constantine, that he's not the overall salvation of Christianity. And a lot of people will argue that he caused more damage in Christianity than he did help to Christianity. It was Constantine's successor, the guy that came after Constantine was Theodosius. He's the one that made Nicene Christianity the official state religion and banned all pagan religions. I thought Constantine did that, but it wasn't. It was the next guy that actually made it the official religion of the empire.
Did Constantine start it?
Start.
The banning? And the other guy finished it?
He didn't ban it, but he started systematically going through and stopping individual pagan
So that would be
religions
Constantine who
and
did that?
seizing their property and giving it to the Christians.
Okay.
But he was still head of the pagan.
Constantine embraced Christianity and he himself became Christian. Am I,
Maybe.
maybe? Okay.
That's
Well,
That is a big debate, and there's still a lot of people that debate on whether or not Constantine was a realist or a Christian.
I see.
Did he see the advantage to Christianity, or did he really?
I appreciate adjustment.
Well, yeah, I mean, I always, that's, and they even talked about this in course of study, that Constantine saved Christianity. But since then, I've watched things like this.
Constantine the Great, born around 272 CE, rose to become one of the most influential Roman emperors, transforming the empire and its religious landscape. He became emperor in 306 CE when his father Constantius died, and his troops proclaimed him Augustus. However, his path to sole rulership was not straightforward. When Constantine began his reign in 306 CE, the Roman Empire was indeed ruled by multiple emperors under the Tetrarchy system. This system, instituted by Diocletian in 293 CE, divided the empire between two senior emperors, Augusti, and their junior colleagues, Caesares. In 306 CE, Constantine was proclaimed emperor by his father's troops in Britain, but this was not recognized by the other rulers. Then, the Tetrarchy began to unravel, leading to a period of civil wars and power struggles among various claimants to imperial power. Over the next 2 decades, Constantine had to contend with several rival emperors, including Maxentius, Licinius, and others. Constantine gradually consolidated his power through military victories. The most notable was the Battle of Milvian Bridge in 312 CE. By defeating Maxentius, it gave him control of the Western Roman Empire. Before the battle, Constantine reportedly had a vision of a cross of light in the sky with the words, "In this sign conquer." He ordered his soldiers to paint the Christian symbol Chi Rho on their shields. Constantine then turned his attention to Licinius, who ruled the eastern provinces. Their initial conflicts in 314 and 316 CE resulted in Constantine gaining control of the Balkans. However, an uneasy peace followed for about a decade. The final step came in 324 CE when Constantine defeated Licinius, his last remaining rival, at the Battle of Chrysopolis, thus becoming the sole ruler of the entire Roman Empire. This complex process of consolidating power took Constantine nearly 2 decades, from his initial proclamation as emperor in 306 CE to his final victory in 324 CE. Constantine implemented numerous reforms to strengthen the empire. He restructured the government, separating civil and military authorities, and introduced a new gold coin called the solidus to combat inflation. Constantine also reorganized the Roman army, creating mobile field units and frontier garrisons to better defend against external threats. One of the most noted aspects of Constantine's reign were his policies on religion. Constantine's mother, Helena, played a significant role in his religious journey. While some sources suggest Helena was a Christian from birth and influenced Constantine's conversion, others claim she converted after he became emperor. Regardless, Helena became known for her pilgrimage to Jerusalem and her alleged discovery of Christ's true cross. One of Constantine's most significant policies was the Edict of Milan in 313 CE, which granted religious tolerance throughout the empire. This edict allowed people to worship any deity they chose, effectively ending the persecution of Christians and other religious groups. Constantine's approach to religion was relatively inclusive, as he did not outlaw paganism or force conversions. Constantine's reign marked a turning point for Christianity in the Roman Empire. He supported the church financially, built basilicas, granted privileges to clergy, and promoted Christians to high office. However, Constantine's personal religious beliefs remain a subject of debate among historians. In his efforts to clean up the empire politically and culturally, Constantine enacted several reforms. He outlawed pagan sacrifices, confiscated treasures from pagan temples to fund Christian churches, and issued laws against sexual immorality. Constantine also disbanded the Praetorian Guard, which had held significant influence over the empire. While Constantine is known as Constantine the Great, this title obscures a complex legacy marked by both significant achievements and controversial actions. The moniker, the Great, was largely bestowed upon him by Christian historians and writers who celebrated his role in legalizing and promoting Christianity throughout the Roman Empire. However, Constantine's reign was not without its dark chapters. He displayed ruthlessness in consolidating power, executing defeated rivals and their sons, even after they had surrendered. Most infamously, Constantine ordered the execution of his eldest son Crispus and his wife Fausta in 326 CE under mysterious circumstances. These familial executions shocked many and tarnished his reputation. Constantine's religious policies, while progressive for Christians, also involved the suppression of pagan practices. This approach, while beneficial to Christianity, was not entirely tolerant of all religious practices. Constantine's legacy extended beyond his lifetime. He founded a new capital, Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, which became the center of the Eastern Roman Empire. His reign marked the beginning of a shift towards Christianity as the dominant religion in the Roman world, though he maintained a degree of tolerance for other faiths throughout his rule.
So, let's say the jury's still out on Constantine.
Yeah, I would say so too.
One of the things that they said he did that probably was damaging in the long run is that when he took over Christianity and built all these churches and installed all of these pastors, the Romans, as they were changing, they stopped wearing the traditional Roman garb of the robes and everything, but he instructed the pastors to continue wearing the Roman garb. So now when you see me with the penguin suit, that's Constantine instructed the pastors to do that. And they did it because he paid their salaries. The churches didn't pay the individual pastors' salaries. They were paid by the empire. So, did Constantine help? I guess he helped it that he ended the persecutions and everything. But then when all of the pagans started becoming Christians and they didn't really know what they were doing, and they said they were Christians, but they did not receive the good, solid education or training. They didn't go through any of the stuff. They brought their pagan practices with them, and so Constantine did kind of put some of the pagan stuff in. Do you remember, you weren't here that Sunday, do y'all remember and I don't know how much of the sermon I took up where I walked around and talked about all the things we do in here on Sunday mornings that had absolutely nothing to do with how the early church worshipped the robes and the altar and the pulpit and the singing and all of this stuff is under influence of Constantine, and a whole lot of what we do on Sunday morning has absolutely nothing to do with what the early church did. So did he help or did he take us down an oddball path?
It's hard to say.
Well, it would
Depends
be-
on how you view it.
Yeah.
It would be unreasonable to think that the church would not evolve over
Mhm.
time, and in this case, it's over hundreds of years,
Mhm.
so seems okay to me.
Yeah. And it was during that time where suddenly everybody's sitting in pews facing in one direction.
Yeah.
And the sacrament of communion started to lose importance. And the sacrament of the sermon became almost a sacrament and the whole worship service now, I think, is focused in way too much on the pastor preaching the sermon.
Yeah. The problem, though, with setting clergy aside from the general populace by wearing robes and holding positions that are very influential within society is that they are human too. And some of them took advantage of that elevated societal role in the form of corruption. And they became influential on the direction of society itself, including this concept of either you follow church doctrine or you're going to spend eternity burning in hell. Jesus never said that.
Okay.
So it was self-aggrandizing, I'm just saying.
But yeah, the next time we're in this sanctuary worshiping, and you see me in all this, and you see me crawl up to that pulpit in the sky, I'm not getting in the pulpit in the sky so that Vicky can see me better from where she sits.
But what I remember as a little girl, the minister always was in the tall pulpit, always.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have no idea why they made it so tall.
They made it so tall to
Nice.
impress upon the congregation how much more important the clergy is.
Oh,
than
Yeah, and they're closer to God.
Yes, because he's up
and
higher.
closer to
Yeah.
God. And that's why the cardinals wear the,
Oh, the little peaked hats,
Yeah,
whatever they're called.
because
Yeah.
they're, and all of your churches have the, wherever the pastor is a little bit
A
higher.
little higher.
Well, they'd have stadium seating then.
Mhm.
And the lions.
Many of the European churches, even the National Cathedral in DC, has a pulpit where you climb up a series of stairs and it's
Wow.
like a bird's nest
Mhm.
up
Oh, my
there.
goodness.
It's probably, at least 10, 15 feet
Yes.
above the floor.
Wow.
Yeah.
Remind me that I'm afraid of heights and not do that.
Don't become a pastor.
Okay.
Well, the church I grew up in, the pastor actually walked through a door, and it took him a couple of minutes, and then he appeared.
Oh, wow.
Well,
Closer to God. Yeah.
yeah, he
Yeah.
appeared closer to
Oh, my
God.
gosh.
And of course, over to one side then was the baptistry, which we don't see anymore.
Yeah. Do we have a baptistry in this church? Okay.
We've got one of those octagon
Yeah, we
things
have
that has
that.
the little
Yeah.
stainless steel bowl.
Remember that?
And when we did a baptism the other day, I went and they had emptied the bowl the last time they did a baptism. So when was the last time we did a baptism?
When we did Kevin Griffith's grandson Diesel, and Carlene was still alive then, I think. I mean, that's been,
Well, that water had been in there since then, so I had to take it and scrub it.
ugh.
I enjoy the more orthodox architecture of churches where the building itself is in the form of a cross.
Mhm.
And there are apses on each side.
But we've got half of it. We've got the choir loft on one side.
Oh, yeah, that hardly counts.
There you go, they just forgot to put the other part out there.
Yeah.
And you and I talked about this before. They had the nave, which is the middle, and then what they call the, what we just call the foyer. now, but they used to call it the narthex.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what I still think of that as, is the narthex.
The narthex is where the unbaptized Christians
Would
Sit.
sit.
would sit.
Oh, wow. Oh, didn't know that.
Yeah, if you weren't baptized, you sat on the
Oh.
other side. And then we talked about before, the communion was always at the end of the service because all of those people were ushered out of the building before,
They couldn't take communion.
right before
Oh,
we took
okay.
communion. And there, in a whole lot of the churches, you know, we've got the communion rail,
Mhm.
but in a whole lot of the older churches, you see there's a cast iron cage kind of thing to separate the laity from the
Huh.
clergy.
Huh.
So that's why I struggle so much with wearing the penguin,
Yeah.
is why am I doing it? And
Well, I must say, I enjoy that level of formality.
Oh, me too.
Yeah. And I enjoy the wisdom and insight that the pastor, including you, brings to the congregation. So, you know, I think it's okay to kind of visually set you apart, as long as you don't become arrogant and corrupt.
Well, I want a staff, that's what I really want, one of those big crook sheep staffs.
Ooh, I've got a cane that looks kind of like a
Well,
staff.
this one's like,
I know, the big one, yeah.
I want the
I
big
never
one.
had that for a sheep.
And you have a little holder up front.
Yeah.
And what I want to do, see, is that I want to follow David in when he's got the light, then I'm walking behind him with the staff, and then I put the staff in the.
Well, you should have a conical hat then.
Mhm.
No, because that's Catholics. I,
We had a bishop that did that, Stanovsky did that. She had the big staff that she carried in. Okay, Lisa's back there doing this, so that
Oh,
tells
we
me,
must be close to time.
that tells me
maybe?
this time to move. We got one more thing, and
Okay.
this is one of those things that's just too big to cover, so we're just gonna hit the high points of it, and that is the heresies. After the persecutions started to die down, then the Christians looked at each other and started reading scripture, and everybody said, well, I don't think that's what Paul meant, or I don't think Jesus really intended this or that. So then the discussion started, and you can see this is 2 pages of heresies that have come out. The other half of this, the other period of time, I said they overlapped it a little bit, but the other period of time was the polemic early church fathers. They were the ones that argued different finer points of doctrine. And I don't know where I got this list of heresies, and it's certainly not all inclusive, but the point that the video is going to make is that a whole lot of these are still around. And the thing that I thought was the most interesting, remember I had nothing to do with this list, but whoever put this list together listed Roman Catholicism as one of the heresies in the church. So I'll just leave that.
You know, it's interesting though that none of this, I mean, I've been reading several of these, none of them are atheist. They all qualify the nature of God. Some of them I actually agree with, but most of them I don't.
Yeah, well, in every church I've been in, there have been people that have followed some form of some of these.
Uh-huh.
And this is the best video I could find on heresies, and it is a really kind of a sarcastic video. So at the very least, it's entertaining. So
Well,
That's what we're here for, to be entertained.
Gnosticism. Imagine Christianity as a massive puzzle, and Gnosticism as a group that tries to jam in a few extra pieces from a completely different set. Gnostics believed they had secret knowledge, or gnosis, that let them understand the true nature of reality. To them, the material world was a bad, glitchy simulation created by a lesser, imperfect God called the Demiurge. Meanwhile, the real God was chilling somewhere beyond human understanding. According to Gnosticism, Jesus wasn't here to save people from sin, but to help them wake up from the illusion of the physical world. Think of him as a spiritual hacker trying to jailbreak souls out of this corrupt universe, but the early church leaders weren't buying it. To them, Christianity was about salvation, not some cosmic escape plan. The Gnostics were soon labeled heretics, and their texts were banned. Ironically, their secret teachings didn't stay secret forever. Some of them were rediscovered in the 20th century, like hidden cheat codes in an old video game. Arianism. Now let's meet Arius, a guy from the 4th century who thought he had Christianity all figured out. He believed that Jesus was not equal to God, but was more like a superpowered assistant, created by God and promoted to divine status. To Arius, saying Jesus was equal to God was like saying a flashlight is as bright as the sun. It just didn't add up. This idea sparked one of Christianity's biggest theological battles. On one side, you had Arius and his followers, and on the other, church heavyweights like Athanasius, who insisted Jesus was fully God. The debate got so intense that Emperor Constantine called a massive church council in 325 AD, where Arianism was officially declared a heresy. But just like a cancelled TV show that keeps getting rebooted, Arianism didn't disappear overnight. It lingered for centuries, influencing later groups who liked the idea of Jesus being divine, but not quite as divine as God. Nestorianism. Ever wonder how people can argue over the smallest details? Well, in the 5th century, Nestorius, a bishop, got into a serious theological feud over how Jesus' divine and human natures work together. He didn't like the idea of calling Mary the Mother of God, because to him, that made it seem like she created God. Instead, he suggested Jesus had two distinct persons, one divine and one human, coexisting but separate, like a divine buddy cop duo. The problem? The mainstream church saw Jesus as one person with two natures, not two separate personalities. So in 431 AD, Nestorius got booted from his position, and his ideas were condemned. But his followers didn't just fade away, they moved eastward and spread their beliefs, founding what became known as the Church of the East. Turns out, theological debates have a way of creating whole new branches of Christianity, Sabellianism. Imagine a superhero who changes costumes depending on the situation. Sometimes a firefighter, sometimes a doctor, but always the same person underneath. That's kind of what Sabellius, a 3rd century priest, thought about God. He believed that the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit were not three distinct persons, but just different modes of one God, like a cosmic shapeshifter. Sounds simple, right? Not to the early church. They argued that this view completely messed up the relationship between the three persons of the Trinity. If God just switched roles instead of actually being three distinct persons, then who was Jesus praying to? Himself? Awkward. By the 4th century, Sabellianism was labeled heresy, and the church reaffirmed that God exists as three distinct persons in one divine essence. No superhero costume change is necessary. Adoptionism. Now, picture Jesus as a regular guy who gets spiritually adopted by God and promoted to divine status, like winning a cosmic reality show. That's the core idea of adoptionism. This belief claimed that Jesus was born human and only became divine at his baptism, resurrection, or ascension, depending on which version you followed. To early Christians, this sounded like a major downgrade. If Jesus wasn't divine from the start, then his sacrifice wouldn't hold the same weight. Church councils weren't having it, and adoptionism was stamped out as heresy. But the idea kept popping up over the centuries, proving that some theological debates just refused to stay buried. Patripassianism. Ever heard of a plot twist that makes a movie completely confusing? That's kind of what Patripassianism did to Christian theology. This belief claimed that when Jesus suffered and died, God the Father suffered too, because they were the same person. To the mainstream church, this idea made about as much sense as a detective and the criminal being the same person in a mystery novel. If God the Father suffered on the cross, then who was running the universe? The church declared Patripassianism a heresy and emphasized that while Jesus and the Father are one in divine essence, they are distinct persons. Mystery solved. Marcionism. Marcion was like that guy who walks into a movie halfway through and decides the first half wasn't worth watching. In the 2nd century, he took one look at the Old Testament and decided it didn't belong in Christianity. To him, the God of the Old Testament was a completely different, lesser being than the loving God revealed by Jesus. His solution? Ditch the Old Testament entirely and create his own edited version of the New Testament, cutting out anything that still sounded too Jewish. The early church was not impressed. Marcion was excommunicated, and his ideas were condemned. But his attempt at remixing the Bible forced church leaders to define which books actually belonged in the Christian canon. So in a way, Marcion's heresy helped shape the Bible we know today. Conclusion. Christian history is full of wild theological debates. dramatic excommunications, and beliefs that just wouldn't stay buried. Each heresy might have been rejected, but they all left an impact, whether by forcing the church to clarify its teachings or by inspiring new movements that carried echoes of their ideas.
Well, that's sort of frustrating. He tells us all the things that are bad, but he doesn't conclude with what is right. What is the solution to all this? What's the relationship between Jesus and God?
The solution is what we have distilled down to after we argued all of these people out of existence.
Right.
Not that we have argued them out of existence. I think I told you that
No, there's many of these still active.
yeah, there was an Arian in the church in Florida that could argue some very, very strong
I think
arguments.
of Arians as being atheists, isn't it?
No, that's another.
Okay, totally different, all right, Jim.
But we think that and I was taught that Arianism went away at the Council of Nicaea in 325 when they all had a vote and they said, no, it's the Nicene Christianity is the right one and not the Arian Christianity, and everybody was happy. But then the more I read about it, I found out that it depended on who the emperor was, and it also depended on all the Goths that came in that took over the Roman Empire when it was destroyed. And new people were in charge, that they went through periods where and this happened a whole lot more in the East than it did in the West. Around Rome, they weren't worried about such things like that. They were infinitely more practical in Rome, but when you get over to Constantinople and the Eastern Church, of course, they're mainly Greek, so they loved to argue. And so they got into this Arianism, took back over again. And then all of the Nicene pastors got excommunicated from the church and sent into exile until the next emperor decided he was Nicene Christian and exiled all the Arian pastors, and all the Nicene pastors got to come back in and take over again. And some of these pastors, one of them was exiled 5 different times, and the 5th time he died in exile. But there were 5 times that he got exiled and brought back because of the debates between Arianism and Nicene Christianity. So that's a big back and forth fight that went on a long time. And we're not going to cover too much the Protestant Reformation that took place in England. Depended on who the king or queen was. When the queen was Catholic, she killed all the Protestant. And when the next king or queen took over, if they were Protestant, then the Catholics all got back.
When did they start the Church of England then, after all that?
That was the start of it,
Oh, okay, all right.
because they were essentially Catholic. And Henry VIII, when the Pope would not let him divorce his wife and marry this other woman, that's
Yes.
when he declared that England was henceforth free from Catholicism.
Oh,
And he
okay.
established the Church of England with him being head. But then remember when he died and all of these other people, and I put a big thing on the wall one time and wrote down all the kings and queens in which direction they went and everything, and I never could. But you've heard of Bloody Mary. She was one or the other and killed everybody else. So we're moving on into the Reformations, and it's interesting, when you talk about Reformations, you're just talking about, everybody just wants to talk about the Protestant Reformation. But there was a Protestant Reformation with Martin Luther, but then there was also a Protestant Reformation with John Calvin, and then there was the Counter-Reformation, which was the Catholic Reformation, which changed, and then there was the Henry VIII, so that's not all cut and dried either. That goes into so many different things.
Wow.
And that's what we'll talk about next Tuesday.
That sounds like fun, actually.